أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Today we're going to begin our first class on the Alfiyyah of Ibn Mālik. This is an extremely important text in Arabic grammar. It is in the form of a nazm, that is to say, the matan, the actual root text, is in the form of a rhymed text, a poem, a rhyming poem. And that was, to facilitate memorization. And there are a number of commentaries on this book. We will be using the Sharḥ of Ibn Aqīl as our basic text. There are many editions of this book, and many printings of various editions. So the edition that we will be employing is the one that contains the glosses and extensive notes of Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, the indefatigable Azhar scholar who prepared beautiful editions of many texts. The Sharḥ of Ibn Aqīl with the notes of Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid in the edition I have has 2 volumes. There really isn't much to be gained by reciting publication and place and so on and so forth. Suffice it to say that it's out there, you can find it. So this is Ibn Aqīl, Qadi al-Qudat Baha'uddin Abdullah ibn Aqīl al-Uqayli, I think, or al-Aqīli al-Hamadani al-Misri. According to the cover, the title page here, he was born in 698 and he died in the year 796. And as for the matin, the author of the root text, Ibn Mālik, that's Abu Abdullah Muhammad Jamaluddin Ibn Mālik, who was born in the year 600 of the Hijrah, died in 672. Okay. So other historical facts and so forth we can get into as we go along, but we won't spend too much time on that. There are a number of important texts on, or studies, modern studies of, what they call Arabic grammar, and I've called it Arabic grammar at the beginning of this, as I opened this lecture. We're studying Arabic grammar, but really, I think we should refer to this as Arabic linguistics. It really is a very sophisticated tradition, and it emerges basically full-blown. If you look at the historical background, Arab historical tradition, legend, it's really hard to prove this, but the Arabic historical tradition among grammarians is that Arabic grammar, or nahu, goes back to Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, transmitted via his disciple Abu al-Aswad ad-Du'ali, and it consisted of the Imam alayhi salam explaining the 3 forms of the i'rab, or the declension, I would call it, of the noun in English, of rafa', nasb, and jar, which in the Orientalist nomenclature are referred to as the nominative, the accusative, and the genitive. However, the real founder of Arabic grammar, we have to say, was Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, and he transmitted his teachings to his disciple Sibawayh. So we have this very important book, which is simply known as Al-Kitab by Sibawayh, or you remove the alif and lam and say Kitab Sibawayh. Khalil died in around, usually the date you find for him is the year 170 of the Hijrah. He's also credited with the invention of the signs of the Fatha, Kasra, Dhamma, Sukun, and Shadda, the very important tashkil markings, which we still use today in the voweled or tashkiled or pointed, if you want to say, copies of the Quran. He was an extraordinary genius. He also compiled the first Arabic dictionary, the Kitab al-Ain, and he also is considered to be the founder of Arabic prosody, and having identified the at first 15 meters of classical Arabic poetry. There are in fact 16, but the 16 is said to have been discovered by his student. Hence the name of that 16th is Al-Mutadarik. So Al-Khalil really is seen by scholars, modern scholars of Arabic grammar, indigenous, that is to say Arab or Muslim, but this case I have in mind an Arab scholar, an Egyptian scholar, whose name was Shawqi Daif, and he has a book, he authored a work called Al-Madaris al-Nahwiyya, grammatical schools, and he is of that opinion there that we really have to credit Al-Khalil, because there's also the view that, well, Sibawayh is the founder. Well, Sibawayh is just conveying what he learned from his teacher, Al-Khalil. So this is really a very, very solid book, but we're not going to study the Kitab Sibawayh. I would still say it's kind of an advanced book, and it's got a lot of things there. There are a lot of important commentaries even on the Kitab of Sibawayh, and the last section of the Kitab of Sibawayh is devoted to the subject of idgham, and there's a commentary on that part called Kitab al-Idgham min Sharḥ Kitab Sibawayh by Abu Sa'id al-Sirafi, who died in 368. This is a really important book. You might say, well, why are you saying idgham instead of idgham? It could actually be either. Idgham is probably better. It depends on how you look at where the derivation of the root is. So if you say it's from adghama yudghimu, it's idgham. If it's ifta'ala and it turns into a dal, then it's idgham, right? We're getting into sarf already. We haven't even started. So there are commentaries, and so this tradition is very vast, and it really, you have to say, it's a linguistic tradition, very much like the modern linguistic tradition. There was the study not just of what we think grammar is about, which is i'rab and nasb and rafa and jar and jazm and all these sorts of things. But in fact, there was the study also of the phonetics, the phonology, how letters are actually pronounced. Now, you won't really find any deep discussion of that in conventional works of so-called nahu, but you will find them in works of tajweed and qira'at. And so that really has to be included as part of the tradition, as well as a genre which is sometimes called fiqh al-lugha. And probably the best book in that is the Kitab al-Khasa'is of Ibn Jinni, which I think this is in three volumes by Al-Hayat al-Misriyyat al-Amma lil-Kitab. So these are all additional sort of important books on Arabic linguistics. And there are a lot of important qira'at works. I'm not going to go through an exhaustive list, but I'll just mention one. Yes, so that I'll mention more than one. I'll mention more than one. So there's the Kitab al-Sab'a fil Qira'at by Ibn Mujahid. This is published by Maktabat Dar al-Ma'arif in Cairo, and it's critically edited by Shawqi Daif. This is a really important book by Ibn Mujahid. Ibn Mujahid died in 324 of the Hijrah. And then there is a Nashr fil Qira'at al-Ashr. This is like this, the standard textbook in Qira'at by Ibn al-Jazari, or Abu al-Khair Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Damishqi, who is known as Ibn al-Jazari, died in 832. These are very important books, and you really can't have a deep appreciation for Arabic linguistics unless you are acquainted with the Qira'at literature as well. Okay, Orientalist studies. There are many very interesting studies of the Arabic linguistic tradition by someone named Ramzi Baalbaki. And he has a volume of his collected papers. You know, go to a library, look him up, do a search on the internet, go to JSTOR, use the resources at your disposal. Ramzi Baalbaki is important. There's another one, there's Kies Versteeg. I don't really think much of this man. He's a Dutch scholar. He came to the American University in Cairo when I was still studying Arabic, and he gave a very idiotic lecture there. And, you know, proceeded to make some really silly remarks about the Quran, and that too in a Muslim country. So I lost a lot of respect for him that day. At any rate, he has written works on the Arabic grammatical tradition. There's a guy named Jonathan Owens. You can look these people up. There's a guy named Carter, and Carter has a book on Sibawayh. I have it somewhere, but I don't see it at the moment. Goldsheer, Ignaz Goldsheer, the famous Orientalist, the you know, from the heroic age of Orientalism. He's almost like a founding prophet of the discipline of Orientalism. Goldsheer has a famous book on the history of Arabic grammar as well. All right, so enough said about things around the topic. Let's just jump right in here. If you can get a copy of the Matan alone somewhere, you know, like a little pocket edition, that's good. I have this one, but this is published in Iran, and there's just mistakes in this. The calligraphy is really nice, but I don't think this is right. But you know, it's convenient if you can get these little things in the Arab world. You can get these little pocket things that have these mutun in them, and you can. It's handy. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qala Muhammadun huwa ibn Maliki Ahmadu Rabbi Allah khayra Maliki. مصليا على النبي المصطفى وآله المستكملين الشرفا. So he's just beginning in the normal way that people would begin, and typically in works of this nature, commentaries, they'll spend a lot of time talking about how it's important to begin with Bismillah, something which every Muslim child knows. They'll talk about the importance of beginning with Alhamdulillah, and the importance of, you know, sending salutations on the Prophet ﷺ and his family. And again, these are things which every Muslim child knows, but typically in these texts, they try and just include everything, and sometimes that does great violence, I think, to the task at hand, which is to actually get to the topic. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time there. I mean, typically all they'll just say, yeah, okay, he's praising God, he's beginning in the name of God, and Ahmadu Rabbi Allah khayra Maliki, he's praising, you know, he's saying, I praise my Lord Allah, who is the best of kings, right? So he's praising him and thanking him, you know, for all of his ni'am and all of his benefits and all of his blessings. And of course, the Alfiyyah is one of those. I mean, this is pretty obvious stuff, but there was maybe a sense of completeness, and they have to, like, you know, they don't want to leave any stone unturned, but in doing that, they often get off the topic. I mean, I can't imagine that the author of this really expected people to write, you know, 10, 15, 20, 30 pages on these opening lines, yet that's what you will find, especially in Hashia works. So I should mention now, there is a genre, there's the Sharḥ, and then there's the Hashia, and Hashia means stuffing. You know, there's a dish in Egypt called mahshi. It's just like stuffed squash and stuffed tomato and stuffed all this. They fill it with rice and usually some kind of ground mincemeat filling. And so these books are literally stuffed with information. And the older ones, they look like this. You know, they have all of these things, and there's the text here and commentary and super commentary. So a hashia is usually called in English a super commentary. And they go into excruciating detail, and these people really did a lot of work. So the Hashiyat al-Sabban على شرح الأشموني على ألفية ابن مالك ومعه شرح الشواهد للعيني is a really good reference work. So I have this, it's in 4 volumes, bound in 2. And I remember this was actually given to me by my one-time professor at Princeton, Hussein Mudarrisi, because he had an extra copy. He says, do you want a copy of this? I said, okay. And then when I was lugging it back to my room, I was thinking, you know, I don't really think I'm going to read this, but one day if I ever have to teach this, this will become really useful.
By repeating the title.
Hashiyat al-Sabban, you can see it, it's right here. You can make a note of it or take a photo or whatever you want. So this is really useful if you want to look up pretty much anything. But another Sharḥ to use along with Ibn Aqīl, here it is, I had it under Ibn Aqīl, is the very beautiful commentary Awdahul Masalik ila Alfīyyat Ibn Mālik. And this is by Ibn Hisham al-Ansari, the author of the famous Qatra al-Nada, the author of Shudhur al-Dhahab. Qatra al-Nada is probably more famous, a celebrated work. I think they teach it in Najaf Seminary. The thing about the Awdah al-Masalik, and here I also have the Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid edition, is that it doesn't have the matan anywhere in it. So you've got to have the matan. That's why I said it's good if you have a sort of pocket or pamphlet-sized thing of the matan. But he really was accomplished. And, you know, Ibn Khaldun said about him that he was anha min Sibawayh, that he was more knowledgeable in Nahu, in Arabic linguistics, than even Sibawayh, you know, the real founder of the tradition. Yeah, Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid quotes that in his edition of the Qatra al-Nada. In fact, I think it's on the title page. That, you know, he says something like, you know, we were in the Maghrib and we heard of a man named, you know, Ibn Hisham, who was Anham and Sibawayh, something like that, he said. So these are really useful. So in the course of our study, you know, you've got to have Ibn Aqīl, which is the standard commentary in the form, you know, as a textbook. You can refer to Awdah al-Masalik, it's quite useful. And then if you have one of these hashiyas like this one by al-Ashmuni, Hashiyat Sabban ala Sharḥ al-Ashmuni is good. All right, so then he says, وَأَسْتَعِينُ وَاسْتَعِينُ اللَّهَ فِي أَلْفِيَّةٍ مَقَاصِدُ النَّحْوِ بِهَا مَحْوِيَّةٍ. So, you know, when you read these mutun, you've got to follow the rhyme and the meter. So I don't know if you notice, but really, if you're following the strict grammar, right, it should be قال محمد هو ابن مالك أحمد ربي الله خير مالك. بس يخرب الوزن, it'll mess up the meter. And okay, Mustafa and Sharafa is fine, but then here is واستعينوا الله في ألفية, right? But you're not going to read it that way. You're going to read في ألفية. And the text that I have is very well voweled. Is yours voweled?
Yes.
So you should have a sukoon on top of the, you know, and they'll drop the two dots for the ta marbuta and they'll make it into a ha. في ألفية مقاصد النحو بها محوية, right? تقرب الأقصى باللفظ موجزي وتبسط البذل بوعد منجزي. So what do you think that means?
Which line?
We are on line 1, 2, 3, 4. تقرب الأقصى بلفظ موجز وتبسط البذل بوعد. Here it'll be وعد.
This Alfiyyah brings close that which is far off in a summarized fashion, and it's you know, its giving or its benefit is widespread.
Yeah, تبسط بسطة, it means to unroll or spread, like a. Yeah, it means like to spread a cloth or unroll a carpet, but it has the sense here of when you basat something, you explain it. And so yeah, it's like it's carrying out, it's fulfilling the promise, right, of explicating the topic of Arabic linguistics. وتقتضي رضا بغير سخط. This one's actually important. فائقة ألفية ابن معطي. So what does that mean?
Ibn Mu'ti had a work known as the Alfiyyah, and you know, originally I believe this was called Al-Khulasa.
Yeah, here the hashia is useful. It saves you time from going in. I wonder if you would even find an entry on this guy in the Encyclopedia of Islam. Maybe in the new Encyclopedia of Islam it's there. I don't know. But so apparently there was another Alfiyyah before that of Ibn Malik by someone named Ibn Mu'ti. I'm just trying to situate myself here in the Hashia. We already gave the death dates for Ibn Malik, so we don't have to go back. So here for فائقة الفية, after that he says al-imam, and so then this will be mudaf ilayh, so it should be, because he's doing interspersed commentary. So he'll say وتقتضي أي تطلب لما اشتملت عليه من المحاسن رضا محضا بغير سخط. Should be sukhti. We had it as sukhtin here, but here's reading sukhti. يشوبه فائقة الفية الإمام العلامة.
And he's saying يشوبه is muqaddar over, or it's mahduf?
Well, he's adding words in between. So, ridan will be in brackets, and then he will say mahdan. You have to look at the page. So this guy is Abu al-Hasan Yahya ibn Mu'ti ibn Abd al-Nur al-Zawawi al-Hanafi, and he was known as al-Mulaqab. His title was Zainuddin. سكن دمشق طويلا. He lived in Damascus for a long time. واشتغل عليه خلق كثير. A lot of people studied with him. ثم سافر إلى مصر. Then he traveled to Egypt. وتصدر بالجامع العتيق لإقراء الأدب. And then, he was appointed as lecturer in the Al-Jami' al-Atiq, which literally means the ancient mosque. I'm not quite sure what that refers to teach literature. لإقراء الأدب. إلى أن توفي بالقاهرة, until he died in Egypt في سلخ ذي القعدة. So on the first of the month of Dhul Qa'dah in the year 28 so 628. ودفن من الغد. So then he was buried the next day على شفير خندق بقرب تربة الإمام الشافعي رضي الله عنه. So he was buried at some location. There used to be some kind of a moat or something there near the tomb of Imam al-Shafi'i. Now, the tomb of Imam al-Shafi'i is there in Cairo. When I lived in Egypt, I lived 5 minutes by car from there. It's close to the very nice posh neighborhood of Al-Ma'adi by car. And it was really in a very sorry, dilapidated condition. Since my departure from that antique land, it has been thoroughly renovated, paradoxically by funds from Uncle Sam. I saw an article on the web. It looked really nice. It's a really marvelous tomb. If you can ever go to Cairo, it's worth visiting. So that's Ibn Mu'ti. So Ibn Mu'ti was a grammarian who had an Alfiyyah before. Now, Alfiyyah, of course, means 1,000 verses. I've actually not counted. It's probably more than 1,000, or just over. And strangely enough, the Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid edition does not have every bayt numbered. There's no tarqim, which is a drawback to some degree, somewhat minor, but not exactly major, a medium drawback from that edition, but that's the situation. I have actually never seen the Alfiyyah of Ibn Mu'ti, and I don't know if it has been, well, I have seen it, but I don't know if it's been published. I was shown a manuscript copy in the form of a microfilm by my much lamented and recently deceased teacher, Sayyid Muhammad Hussein al-Husseini al-Jalali. So he had a microfilm of it, and I don't know if he ever, he used to print up these books at his own expense, usually sometimes in facsimile form, and just send them around. And I have pretty much everything that he did, and I don't think he ever did that one. Unfortunately, I don't remember what manuscript that was. I'm sure I have it in my notes somewhere, but I didn't realize, to search through them before this lecture. But anyhow, maybe it has been published since then, because that was back in the 1990s. Moving along. So he's just again, praising his own. وهو بسبق حائز تفصيلا مستوجب ثنائي الجميلة. وهو بسبق حائز تفضيلا مستوجب ثناء الجميلة والله يقضي بهبات وافرة لي وله في درجات الآخرة إن شاء الله. All right, so getting that sort of benediction section and his own very brief claim that that he is writing an Alfiyyah and that his Alfiyyah is better than that of Ibn Mālik. Let's now go and see what the Alfiyyah is, and the proof is in the pudding. Of course, we don't have Ibn Mālik's to compare, but given the history of this work, I mean, this has been studied by everybody since it was written, and has been commented on and commented upon and commented upon since the time it was written. And it's studied by one and all over the world. Anybody who really wants to do anything in Arabic or really go into Islamic studies, you must have read through this book once in your life. If you have not studied the Alfiyyat Ibn Mālik, as we say in Urdu, you know, if that's true, and that would just, you know, you must weep upon your misfortune, and you must remedy this and immediately study this book. Now, it gets interesting from the very first word. So this has been conveniently divided into sections. And the first section or discussion is really on the minimal units of speech. Now, I don't know, you know, I don't have a degree in linguistics, so I'm not really sure what they would call this in modern linguistic parlance. So I'm just going to use conventional terms as they're used in English. And so this is about al-kalām wa ma yata'allafu minhu. So the simplest way of saying this is that this section is devoted to speech. Naturally, in linguistics, we want to study speech. We want to study human speech. Here specifically, we're studying Arabic linguistics, so we're studying the speech of the Arabs. Arabic linguistics was very much a descriptive science, not a prescriptive one, in the sense that they're trying to record a tradition. They want to really produce a record without any recordings. You know, now if you wanted to do linguistic studies, there's people who go out in the field and, you know, they want to know, you know, what is the Eastern dialect of Tibet? And so they get, you know, speakers of that dialect and they talk to them and they record them. And there's all sorts of things you can do, but you couldn't do that then. And there are even very famous people, famous grammarians. And it's interesting, many of them were Quran reciters. So for example, there's the story told of Al-Kisa'i, a contemporary of Sibawayh. And it's said about him that he went into the desert to live with these nomadic populations. And he took with him a great amount of writing material, pens, and ink. I think I read he took, you know, 40 ink pots or something like this. Stayed with him until all of his supplies ran out. So what was he doing? He was writing things down. And you will find in this book and in other books like the Qatr al-Nada or Shudur al-Dhahab or the Kitab of Sibawayh, any of these books in Arabic linguistics, they will present a rule, and sometimes they will present an exception to that rule, and they will more often than not have an illustration of it. And that illustration is called a shahid. It's a piece of linguistic evidence, and it's a line of poetry. So why were they doing this? We really have to acknowledge that were it not for the revelation of the Quran, and you know, if you're not a Muslim and you don't like the word revelation, you know, let's just call it emergence. You know, were it not for the presence of the Quran, and you have to remember that the Quran is the very first complete Arabic text. Complete is the key word, to be set down in writing. Yeah, it's the first complete Arabic text. أول نص عربي كامل اتخذ شكل كتاب. And really the science of al-Nahw and al-Sarf and Arabic linguistics really emerged to try and explain the usage in the Quran and to further deepen the understanding of that in terms of also what's called al-i'jaz, the linguistic. By al-i'jaz here, I specifically mean, the linguistic miracle. The Quran is a miracle, but specifically its linguistic dimension. And there were works written on al-i'jaz al-Quran and what this means and so forth. So these guys are really trying to understand. And indeed, if you really want to understand the Quran, naturally you have to know Arabic. You have to study grammar. But if you really want to understand the background of the Quran, you have to study pre-Islamic poetry. Poetry is very important. And even today, it's still part of any traditional madrasa education in the Islamic world. You have to study pre-Islamic and other poetry. The pre-Islamic poetry, you have to study the mu'allaqat, at least the 7, mu'allaqat as-saba, or the additional 3, because some people say there's 10 mu'allaqas, the pre-Islamic odes. And then people usually study, a very great poet who comes much later, al-Mutanabbi, and then a bunch of other poets that are included in an anthology called the Diwan al-Hamasa. Right? And I had that book. Where's the Arbery book? Well, we can just mention it. There's a very nice book by, if you want to get introduced to Arabic poetry, there's a book called by A.J. Arbery called what? Introduction to Arabic Poetry, or Reader, or something like this. There. Is it over there? Oh yeah, there it is. Thank you. Yeah, Arabic Poetry, a primer for students. You can actually get this on Amazon for I think $15 or $16. It's still out there. Very useful. So if you really want to understand things, you've got to have a very good sort of background in Arabic poetry as well. And this is a great place to get it. This will get you started. It is a primer or primer. So, kalamuna lafdhun mufidun. They are concerned here with speech. Speech and what are the constituent elements of speech. So he starts with speech. He doesn't begin with kalima. And there is a certain amount of fluidity in these Arabic grammatical texts. Some of them start with kalima, like Ibn Hisham in Qatra al-Nada starts out with the kalima, and he says, al-kalimatu qawlun mufradun. That a word is a singular element of utterance. But here he says, kalamuna lafdhun mufidun kastaqim. Here he says, our speech. In other words, the speech of our, we the Arabs, it really means Arabic speech, is a lafdhun mufidun, is an utterance that conveys a complete meaning, kastaqim, as in the statement istaqim. The ka is not a part of it. I don't know that it's too instructive here, but if you have this edition, the comments of Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, he actually gives you a detailed grammatical analysis of every verse. So like kalamuna lafdhun mufidun kastaqim, he'll say kalam mubtada wa huwa mudafun wa na mudafun ilayh mabniyun ala sukun fi mahalli jar. لفظ خبر المبتدا مفيد نعت لللفظ وليس خبرا ثانيا كاستقم إن كان مثالا فهو جار ومجرور ومتعلق بمحذوف خبر للمبتدا محذوف والتقدير وذلك كاستقم, etc. So what is istaqim? It's what does it mean, istaqim? Istaqim is a fi'al amr. The verb is istaqama yastaqimu, right? So he's saying that speech is a complete is an utterance that conveys a complete meaning, like when you say istaqim, like when you say to someone, istaqim really means istaqama means to be sort of steadfast or regular or consistent. Well. It can be upright, it depends. It can also be, someone who is consistent in a particular behavior. If you have istiqama in something, you are well established in that practice. So like if you get up and run 3 miles every day and you've been doing it for 40 years, then you have istiqama in this practice. All right, so what this actually entails will come up in the Sharḥ. So let's just read the abiyat and get to the Sharḥ. وَاسْمٌ وَفَعْلٌ ثُمَّ حَرْفٌ الْكَلِمِ. Now here he's saying that the noun, ism, and the fi'l, and the verb, after that, the particle, harf, these are words. So in other words, the constituent elements of Arabic speech are three and three alone. And this is arrived at by istiqra, through inductive reasoning. So you've got three, in English we would say, I suppose we'd say you have three parts of speech in Arabic: the noun, the verb, and the particle. Now he comes, so here, kalām, notice that kalām is a word that he's introduced, and then he's introduced at the end of the second, what is this called? Half verse. He uses the word kalim. In Arabic, it would be called, each of these is a misra, and the first one is the first part of the whole unit is a bait shi'r, and it's really, it's a misra, the first misra and the second misra, but usually that's more medieval usage. And so the first misra is often called in Arabic sadr, and the second was called the ajz. It's more modern usage. But anyway, the second misra, or the ajz, he has al-kalim. Now, al-kalim is the plural of kalima. And he says that in the next bait, he says, wahiduhu kalimatun. In other words, the singular form of the word I just used, al-kalim, is kalimatun. Wal-qawlu am. And the word qawl, which can mean statement, is more general. So qawl is more general according to him than kalima and kalām. وَكَلِمَةٌ بِهَا كَلَامٌ قَدْ يُؤَمْ. What's yu'am? Yu'am bima'na yuqifa. Right? How do you understand the word yu'am?
Word to lead.
So, kalima, yeah, kalam, in other words, rests upon kalima. You can't have a kalam unless you have some kalimat. So now let's see what Ibn Aqīl tells us. And that's a couple of pages here. And there's a lot of notes on these pages, which we're not going to look at. So he says, this is Ibn Aqīl. So the Matin, the author of the root text, that portion is concluded. And now Ibn Aqīl is saying, الكلام المصطلح عليه عند النحاة عبارة عن اللفظ المفيد فائدة يحسن السكوت عنها. So you remember I said that كلام اللفظ المفيد, that mufid means a complete meaning.
Sorry, does your version have عنها or عليها?
Did I say عنها? I'm sorry, it's عليها. السكوت عليها. عفوا. So he says that al-kalam, and this is a technical term among the Arab linguistics, excuse me. That means, in their technical nomenclature, اللفظ المفيد فائدة يحسن السكوت عليها. So that is an utterance which conveys a meaning such that it is sufficient in itself and you don't have to say anything further. يحسن السكوت عليها. So if you say, have like just any simple nominal sentence, for example, and you say, الشمس طالعة, then this is an instance of an utterance which conveys a complete meaning and it doesn't need anything else. You can just say, الشمس طالعة, نقطة, full stop. So in that sense then, lafz, he goes on to say, فَاللَّفْظُ جِنْسٌ يَشْمَلُ الْكَلَامَ. So in that sense then, lafz, or what I'm translating as utterance, and Bilal, we need to keep track of how we're translating these. So let's write down for lafz, as we'll say utterance. For kalām, we're going to say speech. For kalima, we're going to say word. Its plural kalim is words. Fa'ida, you know, is linguistic meaning, right? So فَاللَّفْظُ جِنْسٌ يَشْمَلُ الْكَلَامِ. So lafz or utterance is a genus which includes kalam, speech, as a species. So he's making a logical division of genus and species. Then he wants to distinguish kalima from kalam, and he says wal kalimata wal kalim. In other words, al-lafdhu jinsun yashmal هذه الثلاثة الكلام والكلمة والكلم. So lafz is a genus which encompasses speech, word, and words. Moreover, وَيَشْمَلُ الْمُهْمَلِ. Moreover, the term lafz or utterance also includes muhmal, a meaningless utterance. And then he comes up with an example. كَدَيْزٍ. Days, dalya za, is the inversion of the name, the proper noun, Zayd. وَالْمُسْتَعْمَلْ كَعَمْرٍ. It's always Zayd and Amr in these books.
Why does he, when he says jins, sorry, the kalam is the genus for, lafz is the genus
yeah.
for kalam, kalima, kalim.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he add kalim and kalima? I mean, because one is, you know,
he has to use it because Ibn Aqīl is constrained by the poem. Okay. So then there's kalim, right? So he's just including those three. He has to say that, and you could say, why does he do that? Well, it occurs in the poem, so he has to explain it. So the term lafz, unfortunately there's a noise. Someone is cutting grass or something outside. It's out of my control. So lafz, utterance, includes all of these. Akhraja. I got ahead. Wa mufidun. So in typical fashion, they have to explain all of the words that occur in a ta'rif, right? Whenever you have a definition, you have a number of words in that definition, and they want to explain those words that they have used to define the term, because they want to show that it is mani' jama', you know, that it's comprehensive in, you know, in both intention and extension. This is logic. And so now he's explained the term lafz, which is the first word in the definition. Now he wants to explain mufid. Wa mufidun akhraj al muhmal. So because lafz includes meaningless sounds, meaningless utterances, he has to use the word mufid, in other words, something that conveys a meaning, to exclude from the definition meaningless speech. وَفَائِدَةٌ يَحْسُنُ السُّكُوتُ عَلَيْهَا أَخْرَجَ الْكَلِمَةِ. So if you just say الشَّمْسُ, and you don't say anything further like الشَّمْسُ طَالِعَةٌ, then you can't have a single word. But there is some objections that could be raised here. We will come to those. Okay, so he gets rid of, so the word fa'ida excludes kalima. وفائدة يحسن السكوت عليها أخرج الكلمة وبعض الكلم, and some words. وهو ما, you see, when he says kalima there, he means really a noun by itself, a fi'l by itself, right? And a harf by itself. That's how he's defined it in the وَكَلِمَ وَاسْمٌ وَفِعْلٌ ثُمَّ حَرْفٌ الْكَلِمِ. Anyway, وَهُوَ مَا تَرَكَّبَ من ثلاث كلمات فأكثر ولم يحسن السكوت عليه نحو إن قام زيد. So kalim also just means here, though in his usage, a collection of words, right? So you could say inna fil bayti. So you have kalim, you have three words there, but it's not really telling you anything. Inna tahta al-hajari. You have to say something. ولا يتركب الكلام إلا من اسمين. So now he's getting into the possibilities of speech. So the minimum that you can have is two nouns. ولا يتركب الكلام إلا من اسمين نحو زيد قائم. Let me ask you a question though. If we define a human being as al-insanu hayawanun natiqun, okay? We can drop off insan and we can just say hayawanun natiqun. That's a sentence. That's kalam. There's two nouns. It's just like zaydun qa'imun. But what if we just get rid of that and say natiqun? Does that convey a meaning?
It doesn't.
Well, in as much as that there is no other animal that has nutq, it implies, doesn't it, logically? But grammatically it doesn't. So this is a whole debate in logic. And it comes up in usul al-fiqh as well, the debate on what's called al-mushtaq. So if you say natiqun, that implies that you have some sort of a being that has nutq. Obviously an inanimate being, an inanimate object, an inanimate mawjood doesn't have nutq. And so this comes up with certain words like natiq, which is an ism fa'il. But it also comes up with maf'uls as well, like mawjood, and that's a debate that comes up in philosophy. But it also comes up in other things. So like if you say natiq, or if you say natiq, then that thing has nutq, it has speech. Or not, natiq in the sense of speech or in the sense of the rational soul, which amounts to the same thing. But what if there are other ism files that don't mean that don't convey something that exists in the person. So we don't really have these, but let's say there's some guy who's involved with milking or selling milk or something. You could call that person a labin, from Lebanon, right? But, does he inherently have, he doesn't embody milk or something like this. So you can think of ism files, in other words, active participles that do logically anyway convey a complete meaning, but grammatically we wouldn't really say that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most we could say grammatically, if we wanted to justify somehow, is to say al-insan is ma'duf in this situation.
No, we didn't even say that. I said just forget that. According to this right here, it says وَلَا يَتَرَكَّبُ الْكَلَامِ إِلَّا مِنْ إِسْمَيْنِ, and he gives the really obvious and boring example, زَيْدٌ قَائِمٌ. Yeah, I really think we need to come up with our own examples, because after a while this is Zayd and Amr just gets boring. At any rate, so he says وَلَا يَتَرَكَّبُ الْكَلَامُ إِلَّا مِنْ إِسْمَيْنِ نحو زَيْدٌ قَائِمٌ أو من فعل واسم كقام زيد وكقول المصنف استقم. Right? He gave the example استقم. Ibn Malik gives that example فإنه كلام مركب من فعل أمر وفاعل مستتر. So استقم is an imperative form verb, and there's also a fa'il, but that fa'il is hidden or implied. What taqdir istaqim anta. In other words, istaqim you. Shape up, or whatever, however you want to translate. That can be translated in many ways. فاستغنى بالمثال عن أن يقول فائدة يحسن السكوت عليها فكأنه قال الكلام هو اللفظ المفيد فائدة كفائدة استقم. In other words, the Matin, Ibn Malik, said كلامنا لفظ مفيد كاستقم. In other words, he didn't say كلامنا لفظ مفيد فائدة يحسن السكوت عليها. So the example استقم stands in for فائدة يحسن السكوت عليها. Clear? Okay, if that's clear, Then we move to the next paragraph. وَإِنَّمَا قَالَ الْمُصَنِّفُ كَلَامُنَا ليعلم أن التعريف إنما هو للكلام في اصطلاح النحويين. So the na means, our speech, the speech of the, Arabic grammarians, or in our, terminology, kalām means this in Arabic linguistics. He says, لا في اصطلاح اللغويين. Now by لغويين here he means lexicographers. وهو في اللغة, in other words, the lexicographical, the dictionary meaning of the word kalām is اسم لكل ما يتكلم به مفيدا كان أو غير مفيد. Then there's this whole matter about, he doesn't bring this up here, does he? There's this whole matter of the word kalima as well. In hiya kalimatun, what is in the Quran? In hiya kalimatun huwa qailuha. And you can also say in Arabic, you can say that الشيخ الفلاني ألقى كلمة في مجمع اللغة العربية. So the such and such a scholar gave a speech. So kalima can also mean like a speech or an address which is delivered. All right, so now he wants to explain the word kalim. In the next part of the the second part of the of the first line of poetry, واسم فعل ثم حرف الكلم. So والكلم, so he's distinguishing here now. اسم جنس واحده كلمة وهي إما اسم وإما فعل وإما حرف. Well, I said to you before that by kalim he just means these three things. Again, that's in the nomenclature of the Arabic grammarians or linguists. لأنها إن دلت على معنى في نفسها غير مقترنة بزمان فهي الاسم. So now he's explaining why it's only these three. And so he's invoking the idea of time or a temporal dimension. So he says that if you have a standalone meaningful utterance, a kalima in other words, that is sufficient by itself without any reference to time, that's a noun. وَإِنْ اقْتَرَنَتْ بِزَمَانٍ فَهِيَ الْفِعْلِ. And if its meaning is time related, it's a verb. وَإِنْ لَمْ تَدُلْ عَلَى مَعْنًى فِي نَفْسِهَا بَلْ فِي غَيْرِهَا فَهِيَ الْحَرْفُ. And if it doesn't convey or point to a meaning all by itself, rather it needs something else, meaning in something else, بَلْ فِي غَيْرِهَا, then it's the harf. So if you just say fi, ala, bi, li, hal is also a harf, isn't it? You can't convey any meaning. You have to have something else with it. He continues, وَالْكَلِمُ ما تركب من ثلاث كلمات فأكثر. So kalim, it can't be two, it's got to be three because it's Arabic. Arabic has a dual form, so it has to be three. So any sort of three a cluster of three is going to work. So he's got in qama zaydun. In, of course, is a kind of harf. Zayd is an ism. In fact, it's an alam. It's a proper noun. Qama is what? It's a verb. فعل ماض مبني على الفتح. What kind of verb is it? What kind of verb is قام يقوم? قام يقوم على وزن صام يصوم. Correct. والكلمة هي اللفظ الموضوع لمعنى مفرد. And so the kalima is an utterance which by convention conveys a singular meaning, not a single meaning. He's not getting into logic here. So the word ayn is a kalima, and it's definitely lafz mawdu' lima'nan mufrad. In other words, it refers to a singular meaning. Singular means I guess grammatically singular here, or no? A meaning by itself. Yeah. It's confusing because mufrad also means singular.
Maybe independent.
Yeah, an independent. That's good. That's good. Yeah. So the word ayn, depending on context, it has an independent meaning either of al-aynul al-basira, al-nadira, or al-ayn bima'na al-dhahab wal-fidda, or al-ayn bima'na al-yanbu', or al-ayn bima'na nafs al-shay, right? So he's not getting into the question of logic, and things like al-ishtirak al-lafzi wal-ishtirak al-ma'nawi, blah, blah, blah. فقولنا الموضوع لمعنى أخرج المهمل. So again, when he says that we define kalima as a لفظ الموضوع لمعنى مفرد, and utterance which by convention conveys an independent meaning, then when we say الموضوع لمعنى, conveying a meaning by convention, that excludes al-muhmal. So again, that excludes meaningless utterances. وقولنا مفرد أخرج الكلام. And so when you bring in mufrad as independent, then that excludes kalam, which we already said is more. فإنه موضوع لمعنى غير مفرد. Because kalam by convention refers to more than independent meaning. ثم ذكر المصنف رحمه الله تعالى أن القول يعم الجميع. Okay, after all of this discussion, he's saying that Ibn Malik is of the view that the term qawl encompasses all of this stuff. In other words, the term qawl encompasses kalām, encompasses what? Kalima and kalim. وَالْمُرَادُ أَنَّهَا. And what is meant is that the term qawl, يَقَعُ عَلَى الْكَلَامِ أَنَّهُ قَوْلٌ, means that the term encompasses the other term kalām, وَيَقَعْ أَيْضًا عَلَى الْكَلِمِ. I already said this. And also includes kalim, وَالْكَلِمَ, and also kalima. All of those are qawls. Okay, all of those come under qawl. وزعم بعضهم أن الأصل استعماله في المفرد. And some people say, who says this? وزعم بعضهم أن الأصل استعماله في المفرد. So there are those who are of the opinion that qawl also only refers to an independent meaning, and that's Ibn Hisham al-Ansari. Because he says, Ibn Hisham begins by the Qatr al-Nada, he says, al-kalimatu qawlun mufradun. So I guess if we're going to use utterance to translate the word lafz, then for qawl, we're going to have to use statement. Make a note of that, just so we can stay consistent. So that means that every lafz, right, is going to be a qawl. So every utterance is a statement, but every statement is not an utterance. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Each lafz is a qawl, but not every qawl is enough.
Okay. Oh yeah, so now he does get into this. So he says, ثُمَّ ذَكَرَ الْمُصَنِّفُ.
Sorry, each qawl is a lafz.
Yeah.
But not each lafz is a qawl.
Yeah.
every statement is an utterance, but not every
utterance is a
statement.
yeah. I think maybe we had it backwards, but anyhow. وَكَلِمَةٌ بِهَا كَلَامٌ قَدْ يُؤَمْ. So then he says, ثُمَّ ذَكَرَ الْمُصَنِّفُ أَنَّ الْكَلِمَةَ قَدْ يُقَصَدُ بِهَا الْكَلَامِ. Right? So that's what he's saying. What he's saying is that sometimes the word kalima, but again, this is not the usage of the technical usage of the grammarian. So sometimes the word kalima, word, can be used, I guess metonymically, is that the word you'd say in English, to refer to speech. كَقَوْلِهِمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ كَلِمَةُ الْإِخْلَاصِ. So, they'll say that the statement of faith, La ilaha illallah, is known as the word of sincerity, right? I mean, you might refer to the entire Nahjul Balagha as the word of Imam Ali, right? So you have the singular referring to the general, or an example of the particular specifying a whole class. Especially in the Indian Pakistani subcontinent, they'll say that La ilaha illallah pehla kalima, and that's the first kalima, and then there's like the dusra kalima and tisra kalima, especially among the Sunnis. Maybe, I don't know if that's so much among the Shia, but it's used in that way. So in other Islamic languages, you have that usage as well of that Arabic word. طيب وقد يجتمع الكلام والكلم في الصدق وقد ينفرد أحدهما إياه. So it's possible for there to be overlap between the term kalam and kalim in terms of what they refer to in terms of their reference. It doesn't mean that kalima and kalam here are both united in being honest or something like this. If you say that, then you don't understand what it means, right? وَقَدْ يَجْتَمِعُ الْكَلَامُ وَالْكَلِمُ فِي الصِّدْقِ. تمام. وَقَدْ يَنْفَرِدُ أَحَدُهُمَا. And sometimes the one will exclude the other. Okay. فَمِثَالُ اجْتِمَاعُهُمَا قَدْ قَامَ زَيْدٌ. So here's an example. So this is both kalam, فَإِنَّهُ كَلَامٌ لِإِفَادَتِهِ مَعْنًا يَحْسُنُ السُّكُوتُ عَلَيْهِ. So if you say قَدْ قَامَ زَيْدٌ, that would be Zayd has just stood up. The qad has this notion of completion, right? So Zayd just stood up. And that's a kalam, it's speech, because it conveys a complete meaning all by itself. You don't have to add anything to that sentence, to that statement. Wa kalimun, and it's also kalim because you've got 1, 2, 3 kalimats there, right? You have 1, 2, 3 kalimats there. لأنه مركب من 3 كلمات. Okay, ومثال انفراد الكلم. Okay, when you have kalim all by itself, it's إن قام زيد. So there's no overlap there. ومثال انفراد الكلام زيد قائم. So زيد قائم is kalam, but it's not kalim because in Arabic kalim has to have 3 as a plural. Okay, how'd you like that? Now he gets into the signs of the noun, which is وبالجر والتنوين والندى وال ومسند للاسم تمييز حصل. But just for contrast, let's take a few extracts here from what Ibn Hisham al-Ansari says. Now, you don't have this text, so you're going to have to pay close attention. We'll just read through it quickly. What do you think? فعند ابن هشام الأنصاري الكلام في اصطلاح النحويين عبارة عما اجتمع فيه أمران اللفظ والإفادة. So according to Ibn Hisham, and this is his statement which I just read, the term kalam in the technical vocabulary and nomenclature of the Arabic linguists, grammarians, is something which unites 2 qualities, namely utterance and meaning. والمراد باللفظ الصوت المشتمل على بعض الحروف تحقيقا أو تقديرا. And what is meant, again, by them, by the grammarians, by the term lafz or utterance, is a sound. Now, maybe this in modern linguistics would be called a phoneme, P-H-O-N-E-M-E, but I'm not sure. I have a dictionary of linguistics somewhere. We should dig that up for next time and see if we could refer to this as phoneme, but I'm just going to say a sound. Strictly speaking, it's going to be a few sounds, right? Which is composed of letters. And of course, each of those letters is going to be a sound. تحقيقا أو تقديرا والمراد بالمفيد ما دل على معنى يحسن السكوت عليه. That's clear. That's just what he said there, what Ibn Aqīl also said. That mufid means that which points to a meaning which is sufficient in itself without any additional words added. Then he goes to the same thing. He says, وَأَقَلُّ مَا يَتَأَلَّفُ الْكَلَامُ مِنْ اسْمَيْنِ كَزَيْدٌ قَائِمٌ وَمِنْ فِعْلٍ وَاسْمٍ كَقَامَ زَيْدٌ, etc. So he gives an example. Now, there's an interesting footnote here. And I think we'll go through that footnote and then probably stop. It's around 2:30. We started about almost exactly 1, so that's good. We don't want to make this a 2-hour lecture, right? Is that okay?
Huh? I leave it to your discretion.
Well, this is going to take a while here because, so anyway, Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, this point is very interesting. Has a very good footnote here because what Ibn Hisham al-Ansari says in Awdah al-Masalik and what Ibn Aqīl has said in his commentary and what Ibn Malik is pointing to but doesn't go into, and that's why you need the commentary, is the following. So Ibn Hisham al-Ansari says, وَأَقَلُّ مَا يَتَأَلَّفُ الْكَلَامُ مِنْ اسْمَيْنِ كَزَيْدٌ قَائِمٌ وَمِنْ فِعْلٍ وَاسْمٍ كَقَامَ زَيْدٌ وَمِنْهُ اسْتَقِمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ فِعْلِ الْأَمْرِ الْمَنْطُوقِ بِهِ وَمِنْ ضَمِيرِ الْمُخَاطَبِ الْمُقَدَّرِ بِأَنْتَ. There's a beautiful footnote here by Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid. Now he says, ينبغي لك أن تعلم قبل كل شيء أن مراد النحويين من قولهم أقل ما يتألف منه الكلام اسمان, 2 nouns, أو فعل واسم, أن هاتين الصورتين أقل الصور التي يتألف منها الكلام المفيد أجزاء. So this is the minimum. When they claim that that speech is composed of 2 nouns or a verb and a noun, I mean that's the bare minimum. وليس معناه, and it does not mean أن الكلام لا يتألف إلا من اسمين أو فعل واسم. It doesn't mean that speech only consists of 2 nouns or a verb and a noun. فقد تتبع النحاة كلام العرب فوجدوه يرد على 6 صور إجمالا. So, through an exhaustive, sifting of the Arabic of the language of the Arabs, the linguists have come to the conclusion that, in fact, in general terms, there are 6 cases. There are 6 instances or 6 forms of this bare minimum. And if you actually go into detail, there will be 11. Okay, وهي 11 صورة تفصيلا. 6 صور إجمالا و11 صورة تفصيلا. 6 صور إجمالا, right? Okay. وذلك لأنه, and that is because أن يتألف من اسمين, that kalam can be composed of 2 nouns, وإما من فعل واسم, or a verb and a noun, وإما من جملتين, or from 2 jumlas, 2 sentences, وإما من فعل واسمين, or 1 verb and 2 nouns, وإما من فعل وثلاثة أسماء, or a verb and 3 nouns, وإما من فعل وأربعة أسماء, or a verb and 4 nouns, فهذه 6 صور على وجه الإجمال. I'll leave that as an exercise for you to come up with examples of this, okay, for next time. I think that's instructive. He actually gives some examples, but just, come up with some later. We haven't finished reading the footnote, but come up with some for yourself, because usually the examples are not very creative in here. Okay, so the footnote continues. So this was على وجه الإجمال, right? In a general sense. Now he's going to go into detail. أما على وجه التفصيل, and as for the more detailed, exhaustive look at this, فالمؤلف من اسمين له 4 صور. So if you want to take just 2 nouns, that itself is 4 cases. لأن الاسمين, because those 2 nouns can be مبتدا and خبر in the case of, let's have one, Bilal. Besides, he's going to say Zaydun qa'imun. He does, but Zaydun qa'imun is just boring. So come up with something better. Yeah, al-kitabu jadidun. You could say all sorts of stuff. وإما مبتدا وفاعل سد مسد الخبر. Now, some of this is more advanced. Some people may not understand this, but
sorry, first one's مبتدا خبر.
مبتدا خبر زيد قائم الشمس طالعة الكتاب جديد الرجل ذكي الولد أحمق, whatever. Right? زيد قائم. وإما مبتدا وفاعل سد مسد الخبر نحو أقائم الزيداني. Are the 2 Zaids standing? وإما مبتدا ونائب فاعل سد مسد الخبر نحو أمضروب زيد. وإما اسم, عفوا I've misread it. وإما اسم فعل وفاعله نحو. These are actually all, so far, every example is in Ibn Hisham's other book, Qatr al-Nada. Because the next one he says is Hayhatul Atiq. What's Hayhatul Aqiq? Excuse me. What's Hayhatul Aqiq? We took this.
No.
When we were doing Qatr al-Nada, we did get this far. I think, how far did we get with Qatr al-Nada when we were doing it back in the day? I think we got up to like the end of the file or something.
No.
So Hayhatul Aqiq is, how far away is I guess it's a canyon or something.
Uh-huh.
So it continues. He says, والمؤلف من فعل واسم له صورتان لأنه إما من فعل وفاعل نحو قام زيد وإما من فعل ونائب فاعل نحو قطع الغصن. Excuse me. Yeah, it's فعل ونائب فاعل. قطع الغصن. والمؤلف, what's قطع الغصن mean? The branch was cut.
No.
والمؤلف من جملتين له صورتان. So now you've got 2 cases when you have 2 jumlas. لأن الجملتين إما جملة القسم وجوابه نحو. So that's because the 2 jumlas could be a qasam, an oath, and the answer to the oath. نحو أقسم بالله لأكرمنك. I swear by Allah that I will indeed, without any doubt, honor you. So that it's everything here. He's got uqsimu billah, and then lam is also for qasam, la akramanna, and then the noon is what? La akramannaka. What is the noon? Tawqeed. The noon of emphasis, or the emphatic noon. So we're just sort of coining all these terms as we go along. Make a note of that, emphatic noon. I don't know what they actually say, but this is worth making this remark here as well. I think if you're really serious about Arabic grammar, you should never read Wright's grammar. I've never read it. Everybody always recommended. I don't even own a copy. I have a PDF, but I don't own a copy. And that was by, William Wright actually didn't write that. I think that's a translation from a German, and I think the original was in German by a guy named Kaspari. But what happens is that a whole sort of Orientalist nomenclature is introduced on top, which doesn't really work. Even when we say nominative, accusative, genitive, where does this come from? This comes from Latin. And then if you use the Hansford dictionary, which I think is a great dictionary, one of the best dictionaries for any language ever written, without a doubt, you know, it has those Roman numerals because that's how they classify verbs, verb conjugation patterns. So you end up learning this sort of parallel system. And so it's Arabic grammar, but it's Arabic grammar dressed up in a non-Arab dress. You know, it's like dressing up an Arab, a Bedouin Arab in a Brooks Brothers suit and tie and, you know, jacket and tie and shoes and whatever. So it just confuses you. I just don't really think it's worth it. So anyway, that little remark. But we do have to, since we're doing this class in English, we want to make it easier. But we don't want to come up with a whole other nomenclature and terminology. We're just doing this to facilitate understanding, right? وَالْمُؤَلَّفْ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَإِسْمَيْنِ لَهُ صُورَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. Okay, so if you have, this is the two jumlas, right? We're still in the two jumla case. Oh no, this is the next case. وَالْمُؤَلَّفْ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَإِسْمَيْنِ.
We didn't do the second jumla. We just did jumlatul qasam wa jawabuhu.
والمؤلف, no, here it says والمؤلف من جملتين له صورتان. Oh, there's another one. سورة الأولى, yeah. وإما جملة الشرط وجوابه. Yeah. So the other case of two jumlas. So the first one was the swearing an oath and the answer to the oath. You know, so you swear an oath. You know, I swear by Allah. You swear by Allah what? Okay, so that there's the swearing, and then there's the what you're going to do that you're swearing about. Then there's the conditional sentence. So if you do X, there will be Y. So that's in tajtahid tanjah. Both of them have to have a sukoon because it's jazm here. In tajtahid tanjah. So if you strive, you will succeed. والمؤلف من فعل واسمين له صورة واحدة. So the case where you've got a verb and two nouns is only one case, and that's kana. Kana and its sisters. Kana أو إحدى أخواتها مع اسمها وخبرها نحو قولك كان الجو حارا. Okay, so what are some of the akhawat kana? Do you know them?
Yeah, kana, ka'anna. No, not ka'anna.
You know, things like, in fact, I don't think I remember. Yeah, there's asbaha is one of them, isn't it?
Yeah, asbaha, all of the time ones.
Asbaha originally meant to happen in the morning.
Yeah. Asbaha, amsa.
Mm-hmm. To happen in the evening. Dhalla, to happen in the shade. Right, so we have kana and its sisters. So you always have a mubtada and a khabar, and then the kana precedes the mubtada. And so you have some sentences like kana al-jaw harran, the weather was hot, wa asbaha al-jaw baridan, and the weather became cool. You almost never encounter it in its old original meaning. It would have to be some kind of instance of pre-Islamic poetry, to happen in the morning. Now it just doesn't have that. It just means general. And there's no real change in meaning. They just vary them for style in modern Arabic. Okay, والمؤلف من فعل وثلاثة أسماء له صورة واحدة أيضا وهي ظن. Yeah, so if you've got the case of kalām, of speech being composed of one verb and three nouns, then that only has one case, and that's dhanna or its sisters. Dhanna wa akhawatiha. So you're going to have a fa'il and two maf'uls. مع فاعلها ومفعوليها نحو ظننت الوقت متسعا. We always think that, don't we? I thought there was enough time. I thought there was plenty of time. It literally means I thought that the time was plenty, or literally it means wide. Okay, now to finish up the note, this is the last one. وَالْمُؤَلَّفُ. Again, that's الكلام المؤلف, right? وَالْمُؤَلَّف مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَأَرْبَعَةَ أَسْمَاء. So the case of kalam or speech when it's composed of a verb and 4 nouns. لَهُ سُورَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ أيضًا. That also only has one case. وَهِيَ أَعْلَم. The verb from باب أفعل, according to the Orientalist nomenclature, Roman numeral form 4. أو إحدى أخواتها مع فاعلها ومفعولاتها نحو أعلمت زيدا عمرا مخلصا. So that means I informed Zayd that Amr, not Umar, Amr, is sincere. These kind of constructions are almost never used in modern Arabic. You can use them, but you will probably only be understood by people who are really involved in classical Arabic, which is not many. I mean, well, many people are involved, but not many people can actually speak classical Arabic with all of the tashkil without screwing up at some point, and I would have to include myself in that. I'm pretty competent, but it's very it's not easy to do unless you're doing it a lot. And if you're using it every day, and then you sort of get into a groove. But here we are, living in Occidental exile in the West, not having much opportunity to use our Arabic anymore, except by watching things in Arabic and reading books. Not many people to speak classical Arabic with. You need to get up to speed some more, and we need to speak classical Arabic all the time. All right, so I think we probably will stop there. It's a little over an hour and a half we did, and so next time we'll look at the examples of the noun. But I really think it's useful as an exercise to go through all of those cases and come up with your own examples, not because it will really add to any great knowledge of yours, but it will at least then make that knowledge yours. You come up with the examples, write them down, then you remember it, So we'll stop here. The next time we'll look at the, the signs of the noun. Now, in that chapter, or in that portion, there's some really interesting instances of tanween, and they're examples from poetry. So if you haven't read the introduction to A.J. Arbery's A Primer for Students of Arabic Poetry, a primer for students, there's a lot of discussions there of things that happen in poetry, which I think are useful, and they may be useful to us as we move on, because he's going to start bringing examples from Arabic poetry. There will be a shahid from here and there, and those you should prepare them before you come, because there's a lot of vocabulary that sometimes isn't obvious. So just keep in mind, you can't really rely on Hansver after a certain while when you're dealing with poetry. Sometimes the word won't even be there. And also, I must warn you against al-munjid. Al-munjid sometimes is good, but other times it's not. A lot of people don't realize that al-munjid was written by a Christian. And there is such a thing as Christian Arabic, and there is such a thing as a certain bias among some Arab Christians against, Quranic Arabic, and there are instances there. I couldn't give you any off the top of my head at the moment. So if you're going to use classical dictionaries, what is the go-to? We'll just give examples of those and finish it off there. So of course, the simple one is Mukhtar al-Sihah. Mukhtar al-Sihah by Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr al-Razi. It's a short, simple dictionary. And sometimes you can find what you want there immediately. Otherwise, there's Al-Qamus al-Muhit by Firuzabadi. And if you can only if you only have room for one of these, I would get Al-Qamus al-Muhit. And then, of course, if you have room, then there's Lisan al-Arab, but that's very detailed. And then there's Taj al-Urus, for which you also need lots of room. And there's some other kinds of dictionaries, like Maqayis al-Lugha is very interesting, by Ibn Faris. And there's also the Kitab al-Ayn of Khalil ibn Ahmad, but then you just start collecting dictionaries. But really, you will find just about anything and everything you need in Lisan al-Arab if you want to look up the words. Also, if you have one of these hashiyas, the hashiya usually explains and analyzes grammatically the whole poem and usually explains what it means. But Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid usually does that. But then that assumes that you understand what he says when he tells you, oh, well, this word means this. And then if you don't know what the second word means, you're in trouble anyway. So this is where you have to sort of do your homework. That's just the nature of the subject. Very good. We'll conclude there. Wallahu a'lam. Thank you.